break down the architectural details of some of New York City's most popular apartment layouts. First up, the brownstone apartment. So a brownstone is just one house in a series of row houses along the street that's actually made out of brownstone, which is a type of sandstone. So where do you find brownstones? You find them all over New York. You find them all over Brooklyn, the Upper East Side, the Upper West Side, Harlem. They were the residence of choice of developers in the mid-19th century. Let's take a look at one at 29 West 88th Street. Quite often, these brownstones were built as developments. That means they built multiple ones at once. You can see every other one has these arched windows at the top floor, that they were all built together. Each entrance has the same sort of treatment around it, and every other bay has a bay window. All that indicates that they were all built together as one design. So this row of brownstones has 4 floors above grade, 1 on grade, and then there's usually a cellar below that. And typically the main entrance was on what we call the parlor floor, or 1 floor above the ground level. And there's a big stoop that leads up to it. Stoop is just a Dutch word for staircase. Servants usually entered down on the ground floor, and the family entered on what was called the parlor floor. And the parlor floor is elevated just to avoid all of the horse maneuver that filled the streets of mid-19th century New York. So between each individual unit is what's called a party wall, and it's much easier to see from an overhead view. So one of the main characteristics of a brownstone apartment, though, is that you can only get light from the front or the back because of these party walls. You can't get it from the sides unless, of course, you're the end house on the block. And as you can see, each house is set back from the rear, and it creates this whole rear yard that's over here. And here's the street. So New York City's laid out on a grid. So essentially what you have is between the avenues, you have a 200-foot block and then a 60-foot street, and then another 200-foot block and another 60 street. And so they took that 200-foot block right here, that's 200 feet, and then they took a 60-foot street. And they took that 200-foot block and they divided it in half, and they made 100-foot deep blocks, and they basically divided those lots into 25-foot slivers. So that's the basic building block of a New York City block, and each one of these is 25 feet. And 200 plus 60 is 260, and if you multiply that by 20, you pretty much get a mile, and that's why 20 New York City blocks is considered 1 mile. So you'll notice in these overhead shots that there's no alleyways behind these rows of houses, and that's the reason why you see all the trash piled up on the front side of the street, because there was no alleyway to put the trash in the back. So in 1811, when they laid this out, people didn't really have that much garbage. I mean, there was a privy in the backyard, and you used nearly everything. Any food that you didn't use went to the livestock, and